Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you to this panel on women of vice and virtue, or virtue and vice, I guess. Our first speaker is Andrea Radke-Moss, a professor of history at Brigham Young University, Idaho, where she teaches the American West and women's history. Her book, Bright Epoch, Women and Coeducation in the American West, looks at the experiences of female students at land-grant colleges in the 19th century West. She's published widely in many areas of Western women history, including on homesteading, suffrage, education, Native women's, and Latter-day Saints women's experiences, as well as Western women's experiences at the World Columbian Exposition of 1893. And what she'll present today is a smaller piece of that larger research project. So please help me welcome Andrea Radke-Moss.
Just as a reminder, in case you ever let me come back here again, I actually pronounce my name Andrea, but people sometimes call me Andrea, but it might not be relevant if you never ask me back. So it's okay. I'm really grateful to be here. I was really surprised by how well our topics intersect. This is part of a larger project also from my Bradley Fellowship from many years ago. And every time I present on this topic, I'm getting a little closer to having it get done. So that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to do this. I'm presenting on like she said, this is a larger project having to do with Western women's participation at the World's Columbian Exposition. And by a bright, surprising find, the Montana Historical Society had one of the best collections that I've ever seen on Western women's letters and writings and participation. And so I'd like to express my gratitude to the Montana Historical Society for having such great collections and being so well curated. Also, I'm glad to have one of my college students here. Her name is Hannah. Wave your hand, Hannah. She helped me to organize some of this research while she was an undergraduate at BYU, Idaho, and is now living in, am I saying it right, Shoto? Conrad. You all know it, but you're from Shoto, right? Okay. Never mind. Never mind. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Let's see how I can do this. All righty. Let me know if I bug out or something. I'm trying to do where I can see this and look at my paper. Okay. All right. In 1891, excitement was already brewing in Montana with the announcement of the World's Columbian Exposition, an international World's Fair to be hosted by the United States in honor of the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the Americas. The exact location had yet to be determined with certainty, but all indicators pointed to Chicago. As one of the 6 most recent states admitted to the Union since 1889, Montana had much to show at an American World's Fair. North and South Dakota, of course, had been carved out of Dakota Territory on November 2nd, 1889, followed only 6 days later on November 8th by Montana's statehood, and just 3 days after that by the admission of Washington on November 11th. Idaho and Wyoming statehood followed the next year on July 3rd and July 10th, respectively, of 1890. Although Utah wasn't a state yet, the formal renunciation of plural marriage in 1890 by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints put that territory on a path toward statehood in 1896. Thus, the rapid succession of admitted states in the far west was the culmination of the final dispossession, forced removal, and reservation policy applied to the tribes of the Great Plains and Plateau regions. And Montana's contributions in the 1870s and 80s to ongoing mining booms, railroad expansion, and agricultural growth had earned its prominence for helping to achieve the destiny of the American empire in the far west. Montana women had added their own manifest domesticity to the project of conquering and civilizing the West. With so much energy and enthusiasm focused on a Western regional identity, Montanans, like their Intermountain and Great Plains neighbors, felt much to celebrate when the World's Columbian Exposition was finally planned for Chicago in 1893. And if you know the story, they couldn't do it in 1892 just because subcontractors are slow. So they had to postpone it to 1893. Like other American states, Montana directed its organizing efforts toward its counties. And there's the There's one stock image of the Columbian Exposition, but you won't see that again for the rest of the show. So take a look at it, get it in your mind. There you go. There we go. Counties. All righty. Great Falls hoped for a good showing in Chicago. Cascade County, Montana had felt World's Fair enthusiasm very early when Herbert Chowan of the Chowan and Wilcox Real Estate and Mining Insurance Company, and of course, Chowan has been mentioned quite often at the conference, took the lead on organizing the county's exhibit. Discussion ensued about whether Montana would organize its displays by county or as one unified state exhibit. Montana leaders chose to organize and collect exhibitable items and statewide statistics by county, but exhibit as a state, particularly in the Montana State Building on the fairgrounds. Chowan wrote to World's Fair Commissioner Walter M. Bickford in Missoula about Cascade's planning for the fair. Quote, in regard to the subdivisions of the Montana exhibit at the World's Fair into county departments, I concur with you that a general one would be better, as it seems to me it should be principally an exhibit of the state, rather than a display of the local products arranged in a local manner. In other words, the massing of the same resources of different counties into one exhibit would seem to me to promise much better effect than as though they were scattered. Still, Chowan's county pride shone through. From a personal standpoint, we should like to have a county exhibit. And the solidarity with fellow Cascade County residents gave him hope for eager participation. You will find no difficulty in getting material and public support in this county. Looking ahead, Chowan anticipated that, quote, our principal exhibit will be in the way of coal, iron, building material, agricultural products, and manufactured goods, unquote. Like other Montana counties, Chowan's emphasis was on the predominantly male industries. But Cascade's project would soon include a robust, yet sometimes halting effort by the women of Great Falls and the surrounding areas. The city had long felt the anticipation of female exhibiting and organizing for the fair. As Herbert Rolfe's Republican-leaning and pro-women's rights newspaper, the Great Falls Leader, had reported back in January of 1891, quote, there is nothing more certain than the fact that the World's Fair will bring into prominence hundreds of gifted women in the West about whom the world would otherwise be ignorant, unquote. But county women needed recruitment and education. Double check my PowerPoint here. Hang on. After a year of loose brainstorming and informal planning, Montana's organization efforts took off after the new year of 1892. Montana's new and young First Lady Lily Rosencrantz Toole, wife of Governor Joseph Toole, was already serving as one of Montana's lady managers, tasked with helping other women to get involved. Toole was the first to extend invitations throughout Montana for women to serve on county Columbian associations. Typically, she reached out to white women of elite families and distinguished pioneer pedigrees throughout the state to head up their county organizations. In Cascade County, Toole first approached two women from Great Falls as the assistant lady managers for the county, Mary Linton Bookwalter and Minnie B. Parker. Both Bookwalter and Parker accepted their invitation. Bookwalter, like all early volunteers, responded enthusiastically. She said, as it was an honor to be considered. Quote, I shall be pleased to do what I can to assist you in making the Montana exhibit as complete as possible, unquote. And Minnie Parker also accepted the appointment with pleasure. Parker, of course, will go on to be the actual president of the Cascade County Committee. The women of Cascade County were immediately tasked with helping to furnish and design the Montana building at the Chicago World's Fair. Mrs. Parker had similar hopes that Cascade County women could contribute to the construction of the Montana building. Let's see if I have a picture of the Montana building, but it's not in the right order, so hold on to that. It's coming, and you can see what it looked like. All right. By submitting various colors of sandstone that included red, white, and gray, if the dimensions and the color of the stone needed to be obtained, we can secure the stone free without any trouble. The material at hand in this county is not very extensive, but we will make the most of it as possible. Throughout the late winter and early spring, Bookwalter worked with a committee of ladies, although a formal Columbian association would not be formed until a few weeks later. Because of her duties as First Lady, but mostly because of the responsibilities of young motherhood, First Lady Toole eventually resigned her position as lady manager for Montana. So the summer of 1892 brought Montana's new lady managers, Laura E. Howie and Clara L. McAdoe, who left Helena to travel to counties all over Montana. Actually, I'm going to skip ahead so you can see them. There they are. So on your left is Laura Howie, who becomes basically the main lady manager, and then Clara McAdoe, who owned a mine in Montana. That name is skipping my brain right now. Spotted Something, if somebody knows Clara McAdoe, but at the time, she was basically maintaining a home in Detroit, but also maintained a residence in Montana. Okay. All right. The principal aim in their recruiting expedition was to organize women into county associations. The Chicago World's Fair presented an unparalleled opportunity for women to represent their states and nations to a global audience of fairgoers. As states planned and constructed their own buildings for the fairgrounds, Montana women accepted the charge to decorate the Montana building, but also to prepare exhibits that would highlight the finest achievements of the state's female citizens. And I should say the state's white female citizens. For Montana women, that meant that most items collected would be under the auspices of the Ladies County Associations for the Montana building, with others going to state exhibits in varied themed buildings, while others would even earn a very prized place in the women's building, as what the women of Madison County were able to get a chair that I'll show you later, exhibited in the women's building. A statewide organizing effort of this magnitude was unmatched. Similar to temperance, suffrage, and other women's clubs, hundreds of Montana women were marshaled into these semi-autonomous county associations, all under the direction of the State Board of Lady Managers in Helena. County associations like the ones in Madison and Fergus and Beaverhead, Gallatin, and Cascade counties, groups elected officers and committees to oversee local women's contributions in categories such as education, Montana's pioneer heritage, botanical collections, especially wildflowers, women's clubs, art, music, embroidery and needlepoint, canning, dairying, and even more progressive achievements such as women's ranching, mine owning, as in the case of Clara McAdoe, and other business activities. Even while facing numerous challenges of cost, limited communication, great distances, and varying levels of members' commitment to the work, these county-based female associations provided the bulk of Montana's exhibits in Chicago, thus making the state's World Fair presence distinctly and prodigiously representative of Montana women, and fulfilling the promise that, quote, the World's Fair will bring into prominence hundreds of gifted women. Western women's first interest in contributing to the fair centered around what they already knew, the usual feminine domestic interests of local and county fairs, canning fruit, making crafts, and exhibiting poultry. But this World's Fair would demand so much more of them: furnishings for the Montana building and the women's building, compiling statistical reports for all kinds of educational, social, and financial categories, and exhibiting only the very best artistic and literary contributions their state could offer. Still, without knowing what to expect, the early planning for the fair led to many worries about the unknowns. They worried about judging. They worried about the prices of canning jars and supplies. They worried about possibly duplicating fruit samples. And they worried about the costs of transportation and shipping. As Mary Bookwalter pressed Mrs. Toole, the ladies of our committees have had several questions put to them in their work, and will you kindly answer them for us? Similarly, Mrs. Bookwalter assured Mrs. Toole that, quote, we are taking steps to organize a county club as you suggested and hope to make it active in the work. All across Montana, counties received strong suggestions to organize their local leadership into these clubs that could collect statistics and information, organize fundraising events, collect money, and submit items for display in the Montana building or in the specific exhibits across the fairgrounds. And although I don't talk about it specifically in this paper, but I do have a letter in the collection in which the Great Northern Railroad was going to charge, or excuse me, the Northern Pacific Railroad was going to charge extra for women's exhibits going to Chicago than they did for the men's exhibits. That was a gem to find. All right, the Board of Lady Managers felt a key urgency in getting the wheels moving to create a Montana exhibit. The spring and summer of 1892 was a time of excitement and energy, but also a time of confusion as counties worked out what types of products they would send to Chicago for exhibit, where exhibits would be placed, and how contributors and committees would pay for collection and transportation. Sometime in the spring months of 1892, the Cascade County World's Fair Club gained two new members, Mrs. George Field and Martha Edgerton Rolfe. And if you went to the session this morning, some of you already heard about Martha Edgerton Rolfe. So now I'm just going to bring in a small piece of her life into kind of that larger timeline that we were given really richly this morning. Mrs. Field took the lead on collecting canned items for Montana's agricultural displays, but also worried how to afford the jars and the additives that you put in the jars for preservation. Thus, sources of money were a main concern for all exhibitors. While the men placed Cascade's wool exhibit in in prominence, the women jumped into fundraising. In July, let me jump ahead to, oh, there's the Montana building. And there's the Silver Queen. She got lost later. Yeah. Let me just jump ahead to this. There we go. This is the one that I want. While the men planned Cascade's wool exhibit, the women jumped into fundraising. In July, the Girls World's Fair Club gave a Dairy Maid supper, followed by an entertainment and dancing in the Todd Block Tuesday afternoon and evening. The attendance was large, and both the supper and entertainment thoroughly enjoyed. The young misses were becomingly dressed in neat costumes of pink, blue, and white, and presented a very attractive appearance as they served their many customers. The object of the club is to raise funds to send an exhibit to the World's Fair, and this was the second effort to raise funds. On this occasion, the receipts were $68.50, a very neat sum. A slight scare was occasioned during the evening by lightning descending the elevator shaft of the building and setting fire to the woodwork. The flames were soon extinguished and no material damage was done, unquote. And then somebody in the workshop I went to yesterday said that later on that block actually was burned in a fire. So I think it's kind of ironic. Anyway, along the way, it was decided to commission from Cascade County 2 vases or urns to add to Montana's building's interior decorations. Now, unfortunately, as of yet, and this is where I'm hoping the Cascade County Historical Museum can help me, is I have never yet found a picture or image or remnant of what these vases or urns. I don't know if they were large vases. I don't know if they were teeny tiny things. Don't know what they looked like. I still haven't seen any indication of size, design, color, even material. So it could be ceramic, could be some kind of metal. I don't know yet. So if you know, be on the lookout. From late summer through autumn, new members joined Cascade County's Columbian Association. I'm going to back up a little bit to my gals here. The committee gained Mrs. Bessie Marion, also of Great Falls, although she didn't know she had been nominated until after the fact. She wrote to Mrs. Hubby, "Upon my return from the mountains where I had been sojourning during the summer, I was informed I had been placed upon the Cascade Committee for the Columbian Fair. And though I have regularly attended meetings ever since, sought for information as to what was expected of me, I have been unable to learn anything except that I am on education. I'm on the committee, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Bessie's frustrations exposed one of the main challenges for local organizers: lack of information, slow information coming, difficulty communicating information. So this and other difficulties led to a lagging enthusiasm across Montana, but certainly present in Cascade County as well. So in November of 1892, Lady Manager Martha Edgerton Rolfe reported dire progress to Mrs. Hovey in Helena. Quote, "I do not know how to reply to your questions, and at various times except to repeat the same old story that we are doing absolutely nothing. All the time and energy is given to the vases. We are unable to get out enough women to constitute a quorum, so no business can be transacted." Rolfe shared Marion's frustration with the lack of information. "I fully believe," she says, "I fully believe there are enough women willing to work if they are properly instructed what is expected of them, but they cannot as matters are now. No one knows what is to be done. There is no interest, and whose place is it to attempt to arouse it? Believe me when I say it is in no spirit of fault finding, but I think it is your duty to know that these things, as it is mine to inform you." In other words, it's my job to tattle. "However, I am well satisfied with our present officers and can and will work with them in the utmost harmony if they will only do their plain duty." Zing. "If their failure in this line arises from a lack of executive ability, the result is as disastrous as if it arose from willful neglect. This letter is written in bed, so it may have a little of the invalids, but if it helps to render a discord harmonious, it will have served its purpose." By the way, when she's talking about they, she really just means Minnie Parker. So it's kind of like what we all do when we say they, but we're kind of being passive aggressive and we're really targeting one person. That's what she was doing here. Cascade County women were not isolating in their waning enthusiasm for the fair. Let me see if I can find my little Montana map again. There it is. So as I call out some different counties, you can look on the map, although you're all Montanans, so you know where these counties are. This is for the doodles in the room who don't know all the Montana counties really well. Let's see. Regarding the low attendance at the November meeting, even Rolf admitted that I will concede that there was an unusually high wind blowing that day, even for Great Falls. Housework, childcare, and struggling finances all played a factor. In those circumstances, it would be difficult for women to maintain momentum to gather artifacts, crafts, and home goods for display in a city they might not ever visit, and a World's Fair they might not ever attend in person. For all these reasons, many counties across Montana were reporting similarly low motivation. Mrs. Emma Cowan from Boulder in Jefferson County wrote to Mrs. Howie on October 10th that, quote, the committee for membership have brought in some 27 or 8 names, making a total of 38 or more, but we have such small attendance and no one seems to manifest much interest. It is discouraging, unquote. One of the problems, she concluded, was that, quote, we are not reaching to outside towns very well. To improve communication and recruitment, the secretary copied 25 or more papers on committee work and sent them via mail to women in the county. Emma lamented that, quote, so far they have not responded, except for resignations sent in. Still, she was hopeful. We have called for a special meeting for next Saturday to arrive at some conclusion regarding the State House furnishing. We hope to do better later on, unquote. From other counties, the bad news kept coming. Just 4 days after Mrs. Cowan's discouraging letter, Mrs. J.T. Bishop from Dillon in Beaverhead County wrote to Mrs. Howie, quote, we had a meeting this afternoon and oh dear, I do not know what to think, unquote. A conversation after the meeting led to a decision to call in the big guns, or Mrs. Howie herself. Mrs. Thomas came home with me and we talked it over. She wanted me to ask you if you would come to see us again if we will pay your expenses. We will be ready for you and have a good meeting. But some counties fared the worst of all. On December 3rd, Mrs. Cynthia Berg from Lewistown in Fergus County wrote, quote, I am in receipt of diverse and sundry letters on the business of the Columbian Exposition. It is impossible, and she underlined impossible, for us to do anything here. The reasons are too complicated, and the enumeration of the various causes that have operated in the matter would not tend to edification. So I spare you the particulars, unquote. In the end, Mrs. Berg gave up entirely, at least at that reporting. Quote, I have resigned the office I held, chairman of the county committee, and the organization has disbanded, so to speak, unquote. Thus, in comparison to some counties, the Great Falls doldrums were disappointing, maybe understandable, but not catastrophic. Imagine trying to get women to plan for an event which they might not themselves be able to attend. In most cases, personality conflict and varying leadership styles played the biggest role in dysfunctional committees. In Beaverhead County, Mrs. Bishop placed blame directly on the county manager herself. Quote, you know how much help our president is. She has no confidence. She is willing, but that is all, unquote. Miss from Fergus County, I'm sorry if anybody's direct descendant of these people, and you're like, wow, that doesn't speak well for my great-great-grandmother. Okay. From Fergus County, Mrs. Berg called out the failed leadership by name. The appointment of Mrs. D to organize was unfortunate in that she has not possessed a grain of tact and is very unpopular, unquote. A month later, Cynthia Berg was back on the job in Lewistown, although she had resigned earlier, but finally admitted to Mrs. Howie the real source of her frustration. I am very energetic and I could do a great deal, I think, but I am tied down with the care of my children, unquote. We all knew that was coming, didn't we? She conceded the same problem for other Fergus County women. Quote, the women here have no help generally and heaps of children. So you see how it goes, unquote. Any efforts to reignite interest seemed to fall flat. We sent out postals and no one answered them except 3 women, and they wrote to say they had nothing to say. You can hardly understand the little interest the people here took in the World's Fair. So back to Cascade County, which had been struggling with the same problems of low interest in spite of active recruiting efforts. Mrs. Rolfe had also tried the mail tactic back in November, but with slightly better results. Last Monday, I sent out personal invitations and tried in various ways to arouse any latent enthusiasm. The result was 1 woman was present besides the president and myself. After waiting for some time, 4 girls came in, so although none of the regular routine was gone through with, we accepted a design for a vase, then adjourned. But I still don't know what that design is. She could have at least said, and the design is, but she wasn't thinking about me when she wrote it. Now you know the state of affairs here as well as I, so perhaps you could suggest a remedy. It seems a shame that we as a county must remain underrepresented on account of local funds. Mrs. Marion echoed Maddie's description of the episode. She said, I have been to the place when I was the only person present, and then again at another where there were only 3. At a time, too, when it was desired to have a quorum. Well, first of all, I'm quoting from Mrs. Bessie. Let me get back to, there we go. Mrs. Marion, her first name was Bessie. In order to receive a design for the urns. At this time, to add to what seemed only a farce, several of the schoolgirls who were near were sent for to make the desired quorum, and the design was received, which, by the way, was designed by a Minneapolis lady. A humiliating acknowledgement of our inefficiency, it would seem, but in reality, only a lack of effort to secure what might as easily have been done by someone in our own midst. I go from these meetings asking myself, what does all this avail? Yet if I can be enlightened as to my duties and it is not now too late, I would gladly serve in any way, with the hope that I may hear from you. Very truly yours, Mrs. Bessie Marion. 4 minutes. Okay. Mrs. Rolfe had more positive news to report a month later to my dear Mrs. Howie. Sheepishly, she admitted, the time has again returned for my monthly report, but as I have as yet been unable to obtain the minutes of the last 2 meetings, so I cannot give an official report. So they lost the minutes. Sounds like me. I shouldn't judge. Cascade County Women's Disorganization is not too alarming within the context of other counties' floundering efforts, but the Madison County Columbian Association, headquartered in Virginia City, now those women, they were sharp, offered a stark contrast to Cascade County. Let me find them. There we go. Independent, and demonstrates how the successes or failures of Montana's women varied from county to county and depended upon multiple factors. For one, if you've been to Virginia City, the close proximity of all the members' homes to each other made regular meeting attendance more feasible, a benefit that Cascade and other more rural counties lacked. Note these images of Madison County minutes showing meticulous record keeping, regular participation, and actual reporting on previous assignments. And these blessed ladies even continued to meet all the way up until like 1908, because they were still talking about what to do with our chair that we had made. And they were still meeting just like to have tea and break bread. Madison County and Cascade County shared another success in common. Both counties claimed strong connection to Montana's pioneering heritage. So, by the way, in my larger project, I looked at some of the items and things that are coming from these Montana counties, and this is what Madison County produced. Both of these items are now today in the museum right there on the main street in Virginia City, if you ever want to go see them. So there they are, and they got them back. And the table also had a plaque, but it was stolen in Chicago, because things got stolen all the time. All righty, many of Virginia City's women participants in the World's Fair Association held the elite status among the first pioneer mining families from the original gold rush of the 1860s. In contrast, most Great Falls family had arrived more recently to Montana. But Martha Rolfe had arrived in Bannock, Montana at age 13 as the daughter of Sidney Edgerton, an original gold prospector and Montana's first governor. Just as the Madison County women created 2 collage photo frames of Virginia City's original pioneers, you see them here, to display in the Montana building in Chicago. These are, by the way, in the courthouse, if you want to go look at them. Martha Rolfe also requested that her sister in Akron send a large photo of their father to display at the fair. I also don't know which photo or image of Sidney was exhibited at Chicago or whether or where it survived, but something like this seems a likely candidate unless another is discovered. Hint, hint. Through Martha Rolfe, Great Falls' direct connection to Montana's first white colonizers was solidly cemented. Showing off these pioneer generation images was a conscious effort by county women for the World's Fair, a visual reminder of their role in claiming the West for white settlement and American empire. Mrs. Rolfe had other positive news to report, but one thing will please you. Things are beginning to move. Mrs. Field has done wonders, including the work of several committees. Mrs. Marion and Mrs. Clark have also done a great deal toward helping the work along. This report squared with Bessie Marion's similar descriptions of her own work for Cascade County. In conclusion, ultimately, Cascade County succeeded in submitting information and items to the Montana's exhibit of the fair, including the 2 elusive urns or vases that helped beautify the Montana building, which I have yet to find. But the experience of organizing women, both the pitfalls and successes, exposed the vulnerable position Montana women found themselves in. The need to prove themselves organizationally and to produce results led to a direct connection to efforts toward Montana's women's rights in the state. Martha Rolfe observations of Cascade County's World's Fair Association prompted her to make this very direct connection. To a letter to Mrs. Howie, she said, "I entirely agree with you in what you have said about women. If they could only experience an intellectual convulsion, which would cause them to do a little independent thinking, it would be a blessing for humanity." Thank you.